morning, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Napoleon, and today we're back with another Enlisted video, and today we're going to be talking about the top 3 most likely things that are going to happen in Enlisted. To be exact, these are more akin to campaigns slash maps slash factions versus factions that we are going to see in Enlisted. So without further ado, without me describing even more, let's get started with the video. Starting with the first one, and that is definitely off the bat, Japan versus the Soviet Union. We have gotten multiple sources confirming this fact. We have gotten multiple hints, leaks, and whatnot confirming the fact that we are definitely going to be getting Japan versus the Soviet Union. I just personally don't know when. We officially had an event that was either canceled or delayed heavily, and we apparently still don't have Japan versus the Soviet Union. But we know for the fact that the Japan versus the Soviet Union is coming back. And this is very, very simple because, well, it just makes sense. Number 1, for the player base sake, and number 2, for fairness sake, and number 3, it just makes sense for the game, because historically it did happen, so yeah. And number 2, it can make the players that we have right now fight more, or just not against Japan versus the USA all the time. Of course, I don't know when, but we do know for sure that it is almost by the end of this year, if not anytime sooner. It makes more sense if it comes in the next few months, but at this point I don't think there is a big reason to keep us waiting, especially if we just need a few maps. Now I do think that this is not that likely to be coming in the next few weeks, which doesn't make sense of course, but I do think it is gonna come ASAP, so that's great. And from this point on we go into the part in which things are not so easily predicted, and these are the things that they should come in, but Enlisted is probably not. For example, Enlisted should definitely add the Chinese faction or the French faction or whatever. They're certainly adding the French and the Chinese factions in little by little, and what I mean by that is like through event squads, through premium squads, you see them essentially being added to the American or in some cases the German texture. To be exact, the German texture has some interesting French weapons. The Chinese and French texture as of right now is pretty much the American texture. I do think a separate British and Italian texture is almost like a must at this point because we have so much British stuff, we have so much Italian stuff, more so of the British stuff. Now we could potentially use that Enlisted doesn't. That just doesn't make sense, so in my personal opinion, I do think a separate British and Italian texture. This is a good idea if Enlisted wants to add the British and the Italian textures. It just really doesn't make sense on the Enlisted part, and Enlisted has been very quiet on this sector. As a matter of fact, I don't even think Enlisted wants to do this, to be exact. So that's number 2. That is likely in the sense that we're going to be getting more event squads from both China, France, and other minor countries, but I don't think Enlisted is going to be adding any big stuff such as suddenly adding an entire British texture and suddenly adding an entire Italian texture. It just doesn't make sense. Now, of course, we do have another thing that we do have to talk about, and that is Kursk, but that is very unlikely. It is still in the plans, and at the same time, I don't think that's very likely at all, which leads me to my third point. And that is the fact that Enlisted is probably most likely going to add a new battle. To be exact, I do think it's somewhere on the Eastern Front, because remember, we have gotten new leaks, new updates of Japan versus the Soviet Union, and we also recently got the Market Garden map not too long ago. Hence, with Enlisted's recent decision to ask us whether we want Kursk, I do think Enlisted is going to be once again looking back on the Eastern Front. And when I mean the Eastern Front, I do mean Soviet Union versus Germany. Now, where do I think this is most likely going to be? I don't think Kursk is a good idea, but that depends on the community. For example, you guys can decide whether Kursk is a good idea or a bad idea, but I don't think it's a good idea, but that's my personal opinion. And on the other hand, we also do have the issue of we don't have just Kursk one map. We have Leningrad, we have a bunch of other maps, and whatnot. Now, are we certain that it is another Eastern Front map? And the answer is no. And that is a problem, because we certainly don't know if it's an Eastern Front map, but it's most likely an Eastern Front map, although I would instantly have to say that a lot of people are not going to be happy with another Eastern Front map. We do need a map, I do prefer in Italy, to be exact, Monte Cassino, or somewhere along the lines, even if they're not going to add an Italian faction, so that's interesting. To recap, we know the Soviet Union and USSR is... To recap, we know the Soviet Union versus the USSR is officially going to be added anytime soon. To be exact, I do personally think for 2 or 3 months, maybe even later. We also do know that more French and German stuff is essentially going to be added into the game via the United States / Germany if they're unlucky. And we also do know that Enlisted is planning something big via a new map, besides the fact that we are going to get a new map for Japan versus the Soviet Union. Now, that thing is unclear, but I do think it's an Eastern Front map. So without further ado, this is all for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the Discord, and I'll see you in the next one.